the Architectural Review Board meeting for May 18th, 2017. Can we have a roll call, please?
Good morning. Chair Liu.
Present.
Board Member Firth. Here. Board Member Guyer. Here. And we have Board Member Q Kim and Peter Balte absent. Thank you.
Now is the time for oral communications. The public may speak to any item not on the agenda. There's a limit of 3 minutes per speaker. I don't have any speaker cards. And then for staff, are there any agenda changes?
No changes.
Great. So then I think we can move on to the first item, which is actually item number 2, listed as number 2. It's a public hearing for a quasi-judicial matter, 3877 El Camino Real, recommendation on applicant's request for approval of a site and design review for the demolition of a vacant 5,860 square foot commercial building and construction of a new mixed-use project. The project includes a 4,027 square foot commercial building and 17 dwelling units, which are flats and townhouses. Parking for the project is provided in a basement. The applicant also requests approval of a design enhancement exception to allow the basement to encroach into the required rear yard setback below grade. The environmental assessment is mitigated negative declaration was circulated between March 6th, 2017 and April 7th, 2017. And the zone district is CS and RM30. And we have our project planner today, which is Sheldon Alsing. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, and good morning. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. The applicant is also here with their PowerPoint. So you did describe most of the project in a brief description, but just a little more of an overview. There is a mixed-use building that will include 6 flats, and then there'll be 11 townhomes on the balance of the property. It's a irregularly shaped lot. It's an L-shaped lot that has frontage along both El Camino Real and Kirtner. The CS zoning district is along El Camino, and that's where the mixed-use building would be. And then the townhouses would be along the balance of the site with frontage along Kirtner. So it's a 0.75 acre site. There's an existing vacant restaurant that's there with some surface parking in the rear. There are 2 proposals, 2 requests, as mentioned. You have the site and design with architectural review, and then you have design enhancement exception, and that is for the basement to allow for a deviation from the 10 feet down to 6 feet. And so that is their request. This project has been before the Planning and Transportation Commission, and they did have a positive recommendation of approval to the City Council on the site and design, and as well as the adoption of the environmental document. This project did come before this board last month, and the board did have some direction for revisions on the project. So I have just a brief kind of overview about that. The applicant's presentation specifically focuses on the responses to those comments, and those are, of course, illustrated in your plans in the packet. But the board did have concerns about the landscaping on the site, have more screening, providing some more native plantings. Also, there was some concern about security. There was some public comment regarding that as well, in particular with the basement. So the applicant has responded with a security plan that they'll go into detail about. And in addition to that, there was some comment on the existing building itself and the nature of it being historic. The board had mentioned maybe having a commemorative plaque regarding the building's history and past, and so the applicant has responded and how they would try to address that. But I did want to go into more detail about the environmental aspect of the project, which is the mitigated negative declaration that was submitted and circulated between March 6th and April 7th. We did receive a lot of comments. They were all very good, very insightful comments. The consultant that drafted the environmental document did put together a response to those comments, and those are included in your packet. Regarding those, there were some topics regarding the cultural resources. There were a number of alterations to the building, but still there are some significant thresholds that, because of the building was altered so much that it just did not have the level of integrity to have it eligible for listing as a historic resource. And then regarding the traffic, again, there's standards such as level of service. The closest intersection that was studied was at Kirtner and El Camino Real. That's at a level of service A, which is the best. And the project is pretty small and doesn't contribute a lot of traffic to lower that threshold down to a level where it would be a significant impact. Then there was comments about hydrology, and it was found that even though they are doing a basement, that there wouldn't be dewatering that's required. And then having to do also with hazards, emergency access. The project is designed to have standpipes, so you really don't need to have fire trucks actually go into the site. They were able to address any fires or emergencies through other means that were designed. Those are okay with the fire department. So if you have any detailed questions about that, we do have the environmental consultant here that can address some of those. So after this meeting, if we do resolve everything and there is a recommendation for approval of the project, then it will go forward to the City Council, and that's a decision on the site design, architecture review, and adoption of the negative declaration. So our recommended motion is that the City Council adopt the mitigated negative declaration, approval of the architectural review, and design enhancement exception to allow for the construction of the mixed-use project based upon the findings and the conditions of approval. So that concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here with their presentation. Thank you.
And you have 10 minutes for the presentation.
Is it powered up? Is it needed?
That helps.
Good morning. My presentation was put together to specifically address some of the questions that were raised in our previous meeting.
Could you just state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm
Because
sorry. Yeah,
we have
that's right. That's
minutes
right.
and video.
My name is Mark Womack with EID Architects. The first item that I wanted to cover actually wasn't on the list that Sheldon just described to you, but speaks to some of the questions that you had about the materials that were being used in the project. We have submitted the revised materials board, which I believe you have available to you. Yes, okay. And so, in just a description of some of the materials, there were questions, for instance, about how on the El Camino Real elevation, the truss panel details would work and what that would look like. This is a modularized panel system that can be put together to create, some really some clean, very sophisticated looking details. I chose these images to show to you because they address the issues of what happens at soffits and corners. This particular image, you're seeing one of their product lines that's not quite the same tone that we're choosing, but the same wood grain product. And this is the typical detailing system that is utilized, a rain screen system that allows us to get the tight joints and clean design appearance. So this is the product that we'll be using on the key accents on the buildings. The next product that we're using is the Hardy Reveal panels. This is a similar product, but it's a more cost-effective panel. And in our instance, because we're going to be utilizing a hidden fastener system, these panels will be painted to match the color selections on the board. This is the other option for it, which has the exposed fastener system, but we're not proposing exposed fasteners. We wanted to show you these, though, so that you get a sense for how these materials will look in a final installation. Moving on to the privacy screening, the landscape architect has incorporated additional trees placed specifically in front of the balconies per your request. In order to do that, this had to be coordinated with the C3 drainage systems. And so the design will incorporated some newer products that allow us to incorporate both C3 drainage systems and landscaping together, including trees, so that we can meet both objectives in this instance. And then moving on to the issue of the commemorative plaque, we've reached out to the family and asked them to give us some input regarding what they would like to see in terms of verbiage on the plaque that we intend to place on site, blending that in with the bench seating that we're providing. We also are proposing to utilize some of the elements that were saved from the building after the historic analysis. So these will be added together to create a commemorative area to celebrate the contribution that the family created in their work over the years. Moving down into the garage to address the site security and lighting design. The security plan that was put together for us by a security consultant that we've engaged on this project includes a number of emergency call box features that are moving back. They're located throughout the garage by elevators, by stair entrances. These will be monitored 24/7 by a security company. It also includes cameras. One of the nice things about modern technology is that these cameras are not only available for monitoring by the security company, but also by the residents who can access that through internet web pages. And that means they would even be able to monitor security on site from their iPhone as they're approaching the site or leaving their house. The gates that we've employed throughout the project will secure the garage completely after hours, adding to security, and that will be augmented by routine regular patrols by the security company. The lighting consultant has expanded their analysis to create a lighting plan for the basement. And the thing that we want to point to here is that the level of lighting that is being provided in this is actually quite good. These are fairly high levels of lumen throughout the garage. We feel that we've really done what is necessary to create a secure and safe environment in that garage. It's a challenge. I understand and appreciate fully the concerns about an environment like that. On the other hand, when more and more projects within the city are moving towards parking solutions that are below grade, this is the kind of balance that I think we have to strike in order to meet the criteria of providing adequate on-site parking and addressing the security needs. And that wraps up the presentation on the specific questions. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, so we can do questions, or also if there are any members of the public who want to speak. I don't have any speaker cards, but now would be the time to submit a card. So, Robert, and when you have questions.
Yes, could you take me through what the experience of a pedestrian walking by the building would be on El Camino? What portion, if any, of the site would they see as welcoming to them if they weren't spending money on whatever the retail project turns out to be?
Sure, let's see.
And if they were making use of the retail project, to how far back into your landscaping and courtyards would they be invited?
On sheet A1.0, this gives you a bird's eye view from the El Camino Real perspective.
Yeah, my set came stapled in an unusual fashion. It came, you have to turn it upside down several times to find the sheets. Where did it go? This one's amazing. Thanks.
Okay, so what we have done here, first we have the driveway ramp down into the garage that we've placed next to Starbucks. This was placed on this corner specifically to address concerns from the owner of the Starbucks property.
So
that
that's
we maintain
adjacent to the Starbucks
visibility.
drive-through.
So that creates a fairly wide open vista starting at that corner where you can see all the way back past the mixed-use building into the residential portion of the site. As you pass by that driveway, you enter into an open area that's underneath the floors above. But again, this vista is unimpeded except for the security fence that segregates the residential portion of the project from the commercial portion of the project. But you
Excuse
still
me,
have...
and that's the fence that's behind
Yes, yeah.
where the
you
ramp
can
goes
see
underground?
the large column.
Yes.
It's in line with the first of the two large columns.
Right.
And that's really the transition from the public space, the plaza that services the retail area and the entrance to the mixed-use portion of the building. But the view corridor draws your eye all the way back into the site. And obviously, for security reasons, you don't want to invite the general public to have complete access to the residential portion of the site. But by holding this building up the way we have, we've really taken almost 50% of the frontage of the property and created a view corridor that goes all the way back to the first townhome.
And if I wanted to sit down, where would I sit?
There are a number of places where you could sit. You don't see it from this perspective,
Right.
but the back side of that planter that faces the retail area, on both ends of those will be benches to sit on. And I think you can see that on, I misspoke, it's just the first one. On sheet 2.1, there is a bench that starts at the first column of the building and goes back to the second column of the building.
Right.
So that's the bench seating for
Right.
for the public area of the project.
And then the commemorative plaque, which I'm very appreciative of, where is that? Is that in the public area or the private area?
Well, we've got
you have two
two places
approaches?
where we have proposed that it could be placed. We had,
on
quite
the
frankly, we
pillar.
had hoped that we would have been able to have had more interaction with the family to move this a little bit further forward. Because obviously what we want to do is make sure that they are happy with our solutions. On sheet A31, you can see that the idea is to place this plaque into the backs of the bench seating. And here we're showing a potential location that would locate this in the commercial area of the project, which I think is probably the most appropriate because you want this to be available
I
for
would
the
certainly be
majority
in
of people
favor
to
of,
see.
yes, if we're trying to let the public know about the history of this site, that would make sense.
Right. The other opportunity that we've shown is on the next page, 31B.
Right.
That would be back in the common use area of the
Right.
project. But we, as I said, I personally believe that the public area is probably the more appropriate of the two. But our intention was to work with the family to make sure that we can incorporate the verbiage that they want, any sort of imagery. It's a work in progress, but.
Thank you.
I have a question for you on the mixed-use building, portion of the building on El Camino, facing El Camino. So you do have a large recessed area on the first floor, or it's
Right.
not a recessed area, it's an area that's covered by the second floor.
Right.
And you have like a large blank wall on the ground floor unit.
From the
That
front
faces-
elevation?
No, not on the front elevation. This is on the, yeah. It would be on the, I'm trying to figure out, southeast? Like the long elevation, the right side elevation.
Right.
That's where like you have like, in the landscape plan, you have like the acanthus plants.
You're speaking of the wall that's in between the storefront and the opening for the lobby of the mixed-use building? On sheet 2.5, drawing number 2.
Okay, we're going to get to the elevation. me see. Yeah, so 18.5, right. Drawing number 2, right? Yeah, so it's the long wall on the first floor on the right side.
On the right side, after you, okay, that's...
So I was wondering if there's room for, my question is what is your thinking about that? Because that's a pretty long blank wall, and it's in I think I understand you want privacy to the unit there. And that I do understand there's a planter there, so it won't be completely blank. That it will be filled with plants. But I was just wondering what you were thinking about in terms of the big idea for that.
Landscaping is the intended solution. You're absolutely right that it was a privacy issue, and that's why we didn't put windows in that wall. We wanted residents who are entering the site to be focused more on the common use areas that they're beginning to experience as they enter that space. And we wanted that wall really to be more of a backdrop to what was happening. We certainly didn't want views into a private residence, which is what's behind that wall, from that very public courtyard area. So yes, landscaping is the intended focal point along that section of the wall.
Okay, and is it a raised planter? I don't really quite understand the podium.
Because everything underneath this building is parking.
Right, yeah.
In order for us to put any meaningful landscaping in, we have to build planters. There are obviously some plants that we can deploy across the site that don't require much soil to live in, but to get any substantial landscaping into the project, we're going to have to bring in planters. Some of these planters are going to be used to help with the C3 drainage, but not in this instance here. So that's why we do have raised planters in this area.
Okay, and those aren't shown in the drawing, in the architectural elevation?
Yes, and the reason why they're not shown in the architectural elevation is because we put these, the architectural aspect of this drawing, including the Revit model that was utilized to present the 3D views. That work took place prior to the evolution, the very recent evolution of the landscape designs.
That's fine. Okay, and on the, if we could go to I have a question on lighting. I think your cut sheets, I think you included like 4 fixture cut sheets, and then I think there are 5 fixtures being called out on the lighting plan.
Is that 6.1 or 6.2?
This would be... It's at the back. I was actually interested in my concern was the wall pack fixture. I'm looking for the sheet right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure which fixture you're speaking of, but the intent of the selection of the lighting was to try to avoid glare, similar to the type of requirements that we have to meet when we building residences in Woodside, where they have very strict requirements regarding glare.
That's my concern too. And so it was on 6.1. And I think on the schedule, it is fixture number, which one is it? C. It's the LED wall pack. So my main concern is like wall packs are usually, they do cause glare because they're shining, oftentimes they're shining directly outwards. I mean, sometimes some wall packs shine down, but I just want to make sure that we sort of close the loop on this one because you have so many of them. You have them on
Right.
all of the, on all of the buildings, on all of, on most of the fronts and backs.
Well, we would
of the
welcome
buildings.
a condition that spoke to eliminating glare and not utilizing fixtures that create that problem.
Yeah. And again, it's just, I think you've got 5 fixtures and you're showing four cut sheets, so I'm not exactly sure what you're proposing in this location.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think my last question is on the on the mailboxes. So you're showing a mailbox area inside the gate on Kurtner.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if it made sense to have them outside the gate. I mean, that's up to you and the post office, but there's package
Yeah.
drop off and stuff that usually happens outside the gate. I don't think we have to resolve that at the moment, but it was just a question I had.
Okay, I was trying to determine whether or how we would incorporate that outside the gate and what structure that we would need to put out there to screen it and make it attractive. It could be done.
We don't have to design it now, but I just was, have you reviewed it with the post office?
No. But we have a number of mixed-use multifamily projects where the mail rooms and the package drop-offs are within the secure area of the buildings.
That's fine. So why don't we move on to, if we're done with questions, we can move on to comments. So when will you start us off?
Thank you. Well, thank you for persevering with this. It's good to know that we'll have some more housing in a extremely accessible location. I realize that what we see as virtuous because it provides additional housing can also be seen as difficult for people trying to get in and out of Kurtner. And I think some of the responsibility for that really has to lie with the city, not this particular project. Staff, did we hear anything back from our staff, Public Works staff, about the design of the street, the use of rolled curb on what's now a more intensively traveled street? Do we still think that's appropriate? I'm not asking whether the applicant should deal with this, but what our own staff thinks about our own responsibilities.
Thank you, Board Member Firth, Jonathan Lade, Assistant Director. I did have a conversation with our Transportation Department, and that design with the rolled curbs is not something that is employed anymore. It's not a desirable street design. So it's not something that we continue to do, and there is, I know that we'd heard in the public testimony some concerns about vehicles parking over the rolled curbs and into the sidewalk area, which is not actually a permissible activity by our local regulations. And so from time to time, we do code enforcement or courtesy notices to remind property owners of that issue. But yeah, it's not a design feature we do today.
So my comment basically is that I think that we should, or I would like to mention to staff, and when you're thinking about capital improvement project plans for the city, that may be the point where we need to be doing some retrofitting, that this was built under county standards and most of the county won't let you do this. And I found when I've been walking it, every single car has been parked on the sidewalk because they feel if they don't park on the sidewalk, you can't get traffic through there. So I think that this may be, as we continue to intensify housing, it has many upsides, but if we want to reduce the downsides for people who live in that area, perhaps the city needs to spend some of its own money on that frontage. I was happy to hear the answers to the questions about how people would sit and how they would be invited in, and the view corridor in. I think we're very appreciative of housing that makes itself known on the street. This should be inviting and attractive. I like what you're proposing. Staff, I did have one question about flat 101, which is I was trying to figure out how that wall related to the garden on that ground level as well. It's a below-market rate unit, and it's comparable in size to the other below-market rate units. It seems to have very limited natural light because of the narrow setback, relatively narrow setback on the north side, what I think of as the north side towards downtown, and because it's got a completely blank wall on the other side. How does this compare with the natural light in other units?
Maybe we can have the applicant respond to that. Thank you.
Thanks.
The configuration of the windows in flat 101 mirror very closely the configuration of the windows in 201
Okay,
and
which is on
301
page
above them.
2.2?
Oh, I'm sorry, sheet 1.2 and 1.3.
Okay, I'm looking at 2.1.
Oh, that would have worked too.
Those work also, right?
Yeah, I just happened to open to the site plan instead of the
They're a
building
little
plan.
bit bigger.
But the wall that faces the courtyard on the stories above is the party wall in between units on the second floor.
Okay,
And so the unit directly above it has no
so no natural light in the kitchen, this is a recurring condition.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
So not having any windows in the kitchen is a recurring condition?
Yes, right. From a functional perspective, there really is no difference between 201 and 101.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see you do have lighting on two other sides, but natural light. Thank you. I was curious because of our requirement, our goal is that these units be comparable to the others, and I'm satisfied with that answer. I defer to my more knowledgeable colleagues.
Would you comment on the DEE?
I have no objection to the DEE in this case.
Thank you. Robert?
Thank you. When, just as a side note, my first house that I had a kitchen that had no windows in it, and based on how the lighting is done, it works just fine. There really isn't that big a problem. And it is true. I didn't have a big issue because the first floor and the second floor are exactly the same. So anyway, having reviewed this, I'm relatively happy with all the modifications that you made. And so, I mean, the only thing that I guess just sort of caught my eye as an afterthought is the plaque, which has 15 lines of text on it, and it's 8 inches high. Come on now, give me a break. We're talking about a plaque this big with 15 lines of text on it. That might as well just be, I mean, nobody's going to be able to read that. That thing is going to need to be at least twice that size.
I agree that a larger plaque will probably be required until we...
I mean, I saw your comment about or larger, but, in any kind of thing like this, when you're sitting here, I never like to see or larger or smaller, because then that, who knows what we're going to end up with.
We didn't know the final size of the plaque because we haven't resolved the final design with the family. If you'd like to put some condition that specifies a minimum size, we're more than happy to work with that. But we were really thinking of it not so much as trying to minimize the display, but rather that it's a work in progress, and we still have more information to gather from the family before we finalize any design on the plaque.
Okay. That was basically the main thing that I saw. I can approve it the way it is now.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And I would say thank you for the project. This one's been in planning for several years. I think this is a approvable. I think I can recommend approval for it today. I had a couple things that I think that may be better to come back to subcommittee. So one is the lighting. I think you're omitting the first floor covered area that we were talking about before with the acanthus and the blank wall. So that's not showing on your drawings at the moment. And I think that's important because that's pretty kind of a public area. So I would want to see how that's being illuminated. And then again, the wall, I would like more information on the wall pack fixture. On the landscape, I do think that the changes that you've made to provide more screening to the neighbors, I think that's good. We did change the finding for landscape for native plants, and that happened recently. That was this year, and I know your project has been around for several years. But it is a finding, and it is going to council. So I think I would recommend that to come back. I think the landscape design, I think the landscape architect, I think, has picked out sort of architecturally, have like architectural foliage, and they're very attractive and durable plants. But I think we're actually, from the city's point of view, we're looking for something different. We're actually looking for habitat for wildlife. And I don't really see very many plants on the plant list that fit into the plant communities of Palo Alto, which are coastal sage scrub and central oak woodlands. And I think that you could make quite a number of substitutions without really affecting anything. You could get achieve the same look with native plants. So I think it's not and that's just mostly the shrubs. I think the trees can all stay as proposed. I think maybe also at that same time, I'd be kind of curious to see the hardscape. I think you have some notes on the hardscape about what it is, but I'm curious to see more in terms of the materials. It's mostly because you've got a very large podium. It's kind of, you've got something unusual there with such a large amount of podium space. And also at the same time, yeah, if you resolve the mailbox design with the post office, I would be curious to see that as well. Regarding the plaque, I think that I don't have any specific comments about the plaque, but I think that the idea of incorporating the plaque and artifacts in there is good. I can support the DEE for the rear setback, encroachment into the rear setback for the basement, mostly because this is a very unusual, very difficult, very narrow site. And on the parking, I would say I think your drawings are saying that everything is going to be designated parking, and in a way, like between all the different uses, right? So the residences have designated parking, and the office and retail have separate parking. And in a way, I just want to generalize, though, I think it's a missed opportunity for shared parking. Underground parking is very expensive, and the city does encourage or to allow parking reductions for mixed use buildings. And it's really, the point is to be really efficient and not to build unnecessary spaces that stay empty for half of the day. I do realize like parking on El Camino and Cartner is limited, and so I think that what you're doing is probably the right solution in this particular instance. So, and then I think my last thing was I was a little concerned about the blank wall. It seemed like you could have small windows that are up high that would allow light into the unit and allow for privacy, but it's not really on the major public face of the building. So if you want to keep it the way it is, I would not object to that. And then I think my last comment is not really sort of the purview of the board, because it's more of the inner workings of the units. But on the flats, in the mixed-use building, I would be kind of more tempted to put the living rooms down at the end where you've got the balconies. And that means you would have to go through the bedrooms, like have a hallway from the front door. But it seems like that's the more public, you would be putting the public space of the unit, or the living areas of the units facing the common area. But anyway, I think that that's not typically a board A or B concern, right? So, I think you had one final comment, you had a follow-up?
I did, and this is both for staff and the applicant. So this is going to be divided, or is already divided into two parcels, one for the commercial building and one for the residential, or is it a single unified parcel? And is it going to be under one ownership and everything will be rental? Or will some,
So I think we'll
will it
have
be condominiums?
the applicant describe that for you.
Thank you. Obviously, what I'm trying to figure out is how the security plan for the garage is managed and paid for.
The plan is that this will be a condo project,
All right?
but it is one project, and it is one parcel. It just happens to span across two zones within the city, which made it a very challenging project because we had to treat it as though it were two parcels, meaning that we had to comply with all zoning criteria at each end. But it will be one homeowners association. Home perhaps maybe is misleading because it also includes some retail space.
Yeah.
So the retail ownership will also be part of that association, and jointly they will manage the property and the security and all other aspects of operation.
That will be a complicated sense of CC&Rs.
That's why we have
Department of Real Estate's going to have an interesting time with that one. So for staff, my concern is with condition 10, because we're not doing a conditional use permit here, are we? We're just doing a design review essentially and a DEE.
Yes, that's correct.
So we don't have that enforcement mechanism that we will, for example, have with the school project that comes next. So the enforceability of this is going to depend upon the way the CC&Rs are drawn and reviewed, whether the city has a right of enforcement with those CC&Rs. And I think that's important. So I'd like to ask you to consider, I'd like to recommend that condition 10 be modified so that the review includes the review of the relevant, we probably, in some cases, we're always reviewing CC&Rs. I don't know if we are going to be here, but includes reviewing the relevant portion of the CC&Rs to assure there's adequate enforceability by the residents and, if necessary, the city with respect to this safety program. And I'd also, would it be acceptable to ask that, where it says approval from the city, that would include review by the police department, since they are the people most knowledgeable about security issues?
From time to time, we do ask the police department to review plans to address areas that they might think are problematic from a security standpoint.
Public safety point of view?
Dark corners or things like that that might contribute or facilitate activity that, not legal. And so we can certainly do that and have that reviewed. As far as the CC&Rs go, and so that review would be, perhaps there should be some other language in here that talks about the director of planning and community environment shall approve a security plan, and in the course of that review, we shall consult with the
enforceability,
practicality
and enforceability.
And also have the police chief or his designee review the plan.
Well, if you're in the practice of doing that, we don't need to put it in the condition. That's just going to be good practice on your part. But I would like to add that with the city for a plan, blah, blah, and shall be reviewed for practicality and enforceability. And that will.
I think there's sufficient authority in the ARB findings to enforce this condition as you do look at the safety and security of and access to the site, which would include, pedestrian access and so forth. So I think there's sufficient leverage for the city to enforce this, but we'll look at opportunities to tighten that up.
My experience is that it's more useful if the people who are living there have the ability to resolve these issues internally, because they're going to be the people most interested in having this work. And so if we have backup enforceability, that's good, because I agree, we wouldn't approve this design if they didn't have adequate security measures.
Right, and then perhaps the condition could also reference the map that eventually comes through and the encouragement or the requirement for a condition be imposed on the map itself so that we are reviewing that when we are looking at the CCNRs.
Fine.
Okay, so ready to make a motion?
I don't know if I took enough notes on your matters to be referred. I could start.
You start, and then I'll add
All right.
to it.
I move that we recommend approval of the application for 3877 El Camino Real, both for the site and design review and the design enhancement exception, with the findings and conditions presented by the staff, subject to the following modifications. First, that condition number 10 be modified as per staff statement to be reviewed for practicality and enforceability of the security plan, and that the following matters be referred to a subcommittee for further review. And that would be the location of the mailbox and box drop-off, the landscaping along the wall, the kitchen wall of flat number 101, and what else?
You want to just say the landscaping plan, because we talked about
Okay.
possibly native.
Further review, oh, yes, the substitution of native plants suitable for habitat in the landscaping plan.
Yeah, and I think then on the recessed area was just the lighting.
Oh, and the lighting, further review of the lighting, in particular along the recessed area adjacent to flat 101.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
So we have a,
Chair, just before you vote, you had some other comments about Hardscape and more information on the wall packs. Did you want that to return also?
yeah, so I think on condition, I think the fourth item that when mentioned was lighting, and so that was the wall packs and the recessed area.
Got it, thank you. And the hardscape?
Do we want something specific about plaque size?
Oh, yeah, and plaque size? I don't know.
And that there be further review at the subcommittee level of the size of the proposed plaque.
I figure with the plaque, the family's not going to be happy with an 8-inch by 12-inch with 50
In
lines
agate
of
type,
text
yes.
on it. So
Okay, got it.
I'm assuming they can figure that out themselves.
So just to clarify, so this is a recommendation for approval, and this is a site and design, so it's going to council, so it's a recommendation to council. We normally do it to the director. Okay, and then the plaque size, why don't we just say that's the final?
Well, why don't we do
the
it
final design?
a minimum, or I'd say change the minimum from 8 by 12 to, let's say, 16 by 24.
I'm happy to
Twice
add
that
that.
size.
Okay. And, okay, so that's the 6 items. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? None? So that's 3-0-0-2. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay. And we can move on to item number 3, which is quasi-judicial matter. Public hearing for 689 and 693 Arrastradero Road. Consideration of the applicant's request for approval of an architectural review permit for the demolition of 3 existing single-family homes and construction of a new preschool for up to 60 children that would also serve as a satellite expansion of the existing Bowman School on Terman Drive. 3 new single-story structures will have a combined floor area of 17,132 square feet and will be used for the preschool, gymnasium, and classrooms. So type in there. Environmental assessment is a draft initial study mitigated negative declaration was circulated from January 19th, 2017 to February 21st, 2017. A final initial study mitigated negative declaration is available. And we have Claire Hodgkins, our staff planner here, getting ready for the, oops, there we go. And welcome, Claire.
Good morning, board members. I'm Claire Hodgkins. I'm the project planner for this project, also known as the Bowman School project, and it's located at 689, 693 Arrastradero Road. Just a quick overview of the project. The proposed project includes construction of a new private school for up to 60 students ages 3 to 5, and satellite breakout space for students at the existing Bowman School campus, which is located at 4000 Terman Drive. The total gross floor area proposed is 17,132 square feet. This includes the children's house, which includes a classroom and administrative office for the preschool students, in addition to a science lab, art building, and a gymnasium. There would be an exterior play area, garden, sunken learning circle, associated landscaping, and a parking lot drop-off area. Total enrollment at both sites will not exceed the currently permitted 300 students at the Bowman School campus at Terman Drive. And the project replaces 3 existing single-family residences. So this map is just a quick map that shows you the location in reference to the existing Bowman School campus. This map just shows the neighborhood context. Surrounding uses include mostly multifamily residential, single-family residential. Just north of the site is the Palo Alto Christian Reformed Church, and just south of the site is the Hetch Hetchy right-of-way pedestrian trail and Alta Mesa Memorial Park. Key considerations. The ARB raised a few key items for consideration during the first formal hearing. In particular, consideration of circulation and traffic, specifically concerns for queuing on Arrastradero Road were raised. Staff believes that the alternate parking layout better addresses this concern, along with other concerns raised by various different departments across the city. Additional information regarding circulation between the main Bowman School campus and the new annex campus at 693 Arrastradero Drive has also been provided to provide additional clarity about that circulation. In addition, the ARB raised concerns regarding shading at the adjacent Young Life preschool. And the applicant has made revisions to the roof line based on recommendations from various board members, which has reduced shading on the adjacent property. So today, staff is recommending that the ARB consider the previously adopted mitigated negative declaration for the project and approve the project with staff's preferred alternate parking layout to the Director of Planning and Community Environment based on findings and subject to conditions of approval. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claire. And we can do the applicant presentation now, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you.
And John, could you state your name for the record, please?
I'm just waiting for the presentation to get up. So, I'll start. Go ahead. Good morning, board members. My name is John Daisy King, as you may recall. I'm the architect for Bowman School. With me today is Mary Beth Ricks of Bowman School, head of school, as well as Colleen Riley, who is project manager and representative for Bowman School, Bob Cleaver, landscape architect, Robert Eccles for traffic consultant, here today to answer any questions that you may have. As Claire mentioned, this is our third time in front of the board here. In our last meeting, I think the board had a very favorable opinion of the project. There were a few items that they wanted us to address, which Claire outlined well in her staff report. So I won't go through all of those, but there was just a couple that I wanted to touch on. And the first was on this slide here, there was a concern with the doors into the mechanical room on the children's house being maybe looking too much like the entrance for the building. I think part of that was due to the way it was presented. We had shown individual buildings, and when you do that, I could see where that concern comes up. So we did this drawing, which shows the full campus with both buildings, the prop materials rendered, and so on. And I think you can see from here what we're showing. I don't know if I have a little pointer on this. Yep. Where'd it go? Here we go. With this note, this area here is where those doors are. So they're pretty subdued because they're meant to blend in with the wall. And also there was originally planned for bicycle parking in that area because it's sort of a natural, nice little niche for them to be parked in. And so that we have that there as well. Then we're also showing in this the Paseo entrance. We did some revisions to that. It always had an open sort of gate entranceway, but we met with Palo Alto Fire further since our last meeting and refined sort of their requirements in terms of width of gate access and so on. And so we were able to refine that, and I think the scale of this one is much nicer than what we had before when we had the wider gate entrance. And then lastly was just to show to illustrate the open fencing that was in front of the Idea Lab, which was another concern of the board's on that. Let's see. And then this slide was just to show an enlarged view of the Paseo entrance as well as sort of how that bicycle parking laid out in the plan. Then the second item I want to touch on was on the shadows. We had met with Diane Chambers of Young Life Preschool a couple months ago. Before doing that, we took your comment about creating a shed roof over the bleacher portion of the building to reduce the shadows. So we did that and then produced this drawing that we shared with Ms. Chambers. And I'm not sure if she's here today. We'll talk about it, but I think it was a favorable meeting. But this illustrates sort of section 4 shows what is allowed by zoning, current zoning. And then 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the initial proposal that we had when we first met here. And then 2 is when we rotated the gym, showing further reduction. And 3 shows how we changed the roof line over the bleachers. And it also shows sort of what's happening inside the building when we do that. Okay, so I think we've really reduced this tremendously each time we've done that, and we're well below what could have happened. These little pie charts just help illustrate sort of, again, how we've reduced sort of what time of year the shadows actually are cast, and showing how with each revision the cone has been reduced and reduced. So, and then these are just the shadow studies that are part of your package. The next was on landscaping, and for that I'll let Bob Cleaver make comments.
Good morning. Bob Cleaver, landscape architect for the project. And the item I want to first address is the planting area along Arrastradero. It's the public section, and it's a strip between the curb along Arrastradero and the public sidewalk. And we propose a narrow planting of a native sedge, juncus. We chose it, and we're not planting the entire width of the planting area, but we're providing, if you will, a hedge of the juncus. The plant material is evergreen. It's a good solid dark green. It grows upright, and we chose it so that it had a minimum of maintenance, either flopping or growing over the curb or the sidewalk. And we feel that although it's a higher water use plant, it is native, and that with appropriate management, meaning watering, it could be a series of seasonal waterings where it's deeply watered, then allowed to dry out, then deeply watered, and it wouldn't be a constant water requirement. And then over time, it doesn't get very tall and it doesn't need a lot of maintenance. So we felt it was a good choice for a public zone. Going the wrong way. The next item I wanted to talk about was there's a series of questions and clarifications for the existing oak tree. And maybe I'll go back one slide. The large oak that is really the hallmark of the design of the Paseo and how a lot of the buildings are located. It is between the Arrastradero Road and the parking strip, and the Paseo and main corridor through the buildings is centered on this tree. There are protection measures and planting measures deals with raising the driveway above existing conditions, above the existing grade, and having a series of either geomats and root protection material that allows the driveway to occur above existing grade and still protect the tree itself with, well, during construction, some silt fences, and in the long term, a geogrid protecting existing grade from the proposed parking above, and then a nice, soft, simple transition off of the parking and paving area. And then I believe, just as a clarification, there was an issue brought up about the clearance from the tree to the parking, and our 9-foot dimension, and I'm going to ask John to weigh in as well. He might clarify it further, but the 9-foot dimension radius that we have as a clearance was from the arborist report. And if you look at our plans, there is further distance beyond the 9-foot that is actually clear. I believe we have an 11-foot clearance of available to the from the tree to the paving at the parking area. And I believe the recommendation from the staff report was for 10 to 15. And so I think we're close to, I believe we're complying, and but I just wanted to clarify where the 9-foot came from and that we exceed it. I'm available for questions, or I'll let John continue.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, and then the last slide I was going to show today was just to show staff had referred to the staff preferred alternative parking layout. So this drawing slide shows both parking layouts side by side, with the staff preferred parking layout on the left and the Bowman original proposed layout on the right. So the only thing I would say on this is that Bowman School feels strongly that their proposed parking layout, rather than the staff preferred alternative, is the better design for numerous reasons, but primarily for children's safety. However, with that said, if the project can only be approved with the staff preferred alternative, then Bowman School is willing to accept that option. So, and that is it. I thank you for my time, and if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this item? No? Are there any? Yes. And yeah, please state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
I don't need all 5 minutes. My name is Christina Hildebrand. I'm a parent of 2 children who attend Bowman, and I live in the area. And I just wanted to give my support and ask you to approve the project. I did write a letter as well, which sort of expanded on my thoughts on the matter. But and I also ask you to approve it with the current CUP as it stands. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I will close the public portion of the hearing, and are there any board member Questions?
Could staff I had two questions. One was in regard to Penny Ellison's letter of May 2nd. One of the concerns she raised was the impact of this project on traffic in the bicycle lanes. I understand that we have a conditional use permit condition that essentially says no traffic backup allowed. So whatever is necessary to make that happen will happen. But could you explain to me what, if any, adverse impact this might have on bicycle lane use during the hours in which the school is loading and unloading?
Thank you. I did, yes. So a couple things. Firstly, we are not anticipating an impact as outlined in the final initial study negative declaration because we aren't anticipating, based on the anticipated number of drop-offs at each time period, we don't anticipate that queuing would happen in the street. However, we have provided additional measures just to ensure, the contingent item.
The unpredictable.
Ensuring. I want to also note that the way it's designed is essentially that you would move into the bicycle lane and then turn, and that's kind of per MTUCD standards in terms of how you're supposed to turn into a bicycle lane. So instead of turning over the lane, you would merge into that bicycle lane and then turn into the site.
So you'd be going bicycle speed, we hope.
Yes. Is there anything that's good? Yeah. Okay.
And then with respect to these alternative proposals for getting on and off the site, could you take me through that just briefly and explain to me how it relates to the proposed Arrastradero median islands and whatnot? Did the original plan assume a gap that doesn't exist?
Yes, essentially, it looked at a design where there was an option to turn in to the site from the westbound, going westbound. And fire department did anticipate that they would have that option. However, in coordinating with Public Works Engineering, they identified that as a potential landscape area that they really wanted to keep as part of that Charleston-Arrastadero corridor project. So in discussing with them and discussing with fire indicated that if Public Works, if they couldn't have that option, they would prefer not to be turning into the egress to the site, because that would have them going into oncoming traffic. So
they'd enter at the other end of the site. Thank you.
You looking for questions? Yeah, so can you, the request was obviously made to have a complete redesign of the front parking lot. Can you basically describe why the staff thinks that this alternate design is so much better than the existing one, or the one that they propose?
Yeah, of course. So I have outlined in the staff report under the analysis section on page 84 of the packet, a number of different reasons why we feel that this is the preferred parking alternative. And I think I spoke to a couple of those reasons related to Public Works Engineering really wanting landscape in that area. There's not a lot of opportunities for landscape along the Charleston-Arastadero corridor. And based on public comments going back to, I think, 2004, in creating that concept design for Charleston-Arastadero that was approved by council, this was a real opportunity area. So there's that. And based on that, addressing fires concerns and still having access to the site. The other reasons that we outlined were the way this is designed would allow for queuing at a point in the street where there is more room, essentially, not at the narrowest point of the street. So, you know, if queuing were to happen, we wanted to mitigate that issue by providing opportunities for a car to still be able to move around them. You know, as you know, Charleston-Arastadero corridor has a lot of traffic on it, so we really want to ensure that that flow is maintained. I think that's all.
Thank you. That's all I needed.
Okay, and I have one question for the, I guess this is a landscape question for the landscape architect. On the, adjacent to the Hetch Hetchy right-of-way and the multi-use trail, I think there's an existing fence, which I think you're proposing to remove, I'm guessing, from the drawings. And I was just wondering what are you proposing there along the, sort of the, in the front setback area in terms of planting and if there's, and fence design.
Okay, thank you. The existing fence is in pretty poor condition.
Yeah.
And we were discussing replacing it with a wood fence, solid wood fence that would have a, let's call it a natural finish. It would not be a colored, it would have either a weathered or a color compatible with the buildings and the other improvements, but it was a simple solid fence, and it would wrap from the Hetch Hetchy towards the children's house, towards the main building, and there are utilities that the fence would separate from the children's play area and the parking area, and the intent was to just have a simple, clean fence with no distractions for kids in the children play area and for privacy or views in from Hetch Hetchy to be minimal.
And then closer to the street, what were you thinking in terms of planting?
We, and I'm going to ask John for to follow up. Currently, our fencing was stopping at the return of the fence to the children's house, and there is the bike path that comes between the parking and Hetch Hetchy, and I believe there's a turnoff, and I'm trying to look at the screen, and if I could point to it, I want to say that. I'm not getting.
Landscape between where the 6-foot fence stops and the corner down below, because that's sort of open right now. We weren't trying to wall it off.
Right.
That's what that landscaping is.
Thank you, John. So with the bike parking, bike path in there, between the parking and Hetch Hetchy, there was no fence proposed. It was just a planting buffer, and literally the fence would turn back onto the children's house.
That's fine. I was actually interested in the actual plants that you're proposing, and then I think there's an art piece proposed in the walkway, and I was just trying to just sort of conceptually understand what's happening.
Okay.
In there, like the big idea. Really.
Okay. So the planting I can speak to directly, in the art piece, I think Mary Beth, the school director, can help us with that. But the planting is all native and mostly evergreen, and it mostly low because of the narrowness of the planting areas, and the importance of visual, being able to see bikes paths, being able to see out, and people being able to see in onto the bike paths and people on it. So the planting is mostly a mixes of grasses and things that are relatively soft, and the intent was to use a mix of plants that didn't require a lot of maintenance, and that would have a natural look to them. So there are oak trees proposed, and again, we were thinking they were standard form where the branching was high enough that, again, visual would be easy to see in, and again, see interactions of people on the bike path. Can I clarify further, or?
Nope, that's good, thank you. I was mostly just concerned because there isn't really anything, there isn't very much planting on the Hetchetchi, and I was just trying to figure out how you're going to sort of blend in, and I think it's actually better not to have the fence in this particular location. So, great, thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
And then the art piece, I am interested in that.
Good morning.
Welcome.
My name is Mary Beth Ricks. I'm the head of school at Bowman School in Palo Alto. So the art piece currently being proposed is a collaborative work between an artist and art students, and using the 10 sort of tenets of Montessori to create some large embedded pieces on the sidewalk that goes on the school property part, not the public sidewalk, but the school sidewalk, so that it would be accessible to the public, and that you would sort of walk over these pieces of art as you entered and exited our building.
Great, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions, why don't we move on to board member comments? Wynn?
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts that were made to reduce the shading next door. I'm sorry that there are still shade impacts on a nursery school play area, but I think that you have done what you can, and that the impacts are no more severe than would be provided by single-family development here. So I think we cannot really ask for more at this point. So it's regrettable, but I think you've minimized it to the extent that you can. I suspect the juncus can be used for craft projects as well as landscaping. It's a nice plant. On the parking, I'm convinced by the staff analysis, which I think is on page 87. I went over it fairly carefully and drove by the site and walked it a couple more times. Schools are interesting. I mean, they get conditional use permits because they're desirable uses, but they need special handling so as not to adversely affect their neighbors. And the disadvantage of schools as a neighbor is that they involve peak traffic at peak hours. And the advantage, of course, is that they're schools. And particularly in this case, it's a community that has a lot of power to regulate the behavior of its own participants and to work together to make this possible. I realize that it will require lots of education and training and reinforcement to have people use this system the way that they need to, but I believe the staff recommendations is the better one. Staff recommendation is the better one. So I would support this enthusiastically with that proviso.
And Robert?
I agree. The modifications you've made, I think, work very well, especially with the gymnasium. Like I said, that's about the best you can do other than making it an impractical building for what the function is. I do also agree, having done various schools, and there's always, when you get with the little kids, the whole queuing and dropping them off and everything else. And I like the alternate, if you want to call it, the staff requested alternative better, and I think I'd be willing to approve it with that, not the other one.
Okay, so I think I'm in agreement as well with other board members. It seems like the alternate is better for, what do I say, for off. I think it helps with the drop off, but also it's mostly helps with, to me, with the flow on Arrastradero. And I think it's better not to have a greater separation between the parking entrance and then the Hetchetchee multi-use trail, because I use the trail occasionally, and I think that that particular corner where the trail hits Arrastradero is pretty tricky at peak hours. It's pretty difficult to cross there. So I would support that. I do understand that you're losing 3 parking spots. It seems to me 90-degree parking is a little harder to turn into than the angled parking that you had. So I understand both sides, but it seems to me that this, the staff alternate seems to me to meet all of the city department's requirements. So I'm fine with going with that. So I have one last question for staff with regard to the oak tree, to the tree number 2. So I think the staff report was recommending modifying the condition of approval, if I understand that correctly. So we have an arborist report, right? And when we have their drawings, and we have an existing condition of approval, right, which is 30, is it 29 or 39? Or is it 39? So I guess my question is, does 39 cover everything, like the 9 foot that's listed in the drawings and the arborist report, and then the 10 foot that was suggested by, I think, another board member?
So I have added a condition of approval to provide a 10-foot radius from the tree.
So do you want, well, these are draft, right? I think these are draft conditions, right?
These are draft conditions,
Yeah, so you're thinking, were you proposing to amend 39, or were you thinking of adding something in addition to that?
I'm trying to find it. 104. 104. Sorry.
And 39 was on page 104.
Yeah, so actually I had added under planning conditions of approval, I had added a requirement for a 10-foot radius. So I actually had put it under our conditions rather than urban forestry conditions. It's under number 7, additional parking layout refinements. I said, in addition, the parking layout shall be revised to provide a 10-foot radius from the nearest parking stall to the trunk of the protected oak tree prior to building permit issuance.
Okay. Okay, so then I think we're good to go as is. Okay, I'm willing to entertain motions.
Okay. I move that we accept staff's, that we recommend to the Director of Community Development, having considered the mitigated negative declaration previously adopted, that we recommend the approved project with staff's preferred alternative parking layout included in attachment 1, to the Director of Planning and Community Environment based on findings and subject to the conditions of approval included in attachments A and B to this staff report number 7845.
And is there anyone seconding?
I'll second that.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. So that's a 3-0. 2 members with Balte and Q abstaining, or absent. Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you need a break?
That would be nice.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll hear the last item. And the address is 250 Hamilton Avenue in here on the agenda, but it's actually multiple sites in South Palo Alto. Preliminary architectural review of location and design options for the deployment of Verizon's small cell wireless communication equipment on utility poles in the public right-of-way. The proposed 18 small cell node locations in this preliminary architectural review application are considered a cluster of nodes within the proposed overall deployment of 92 small cell locations. And the environmental assessment is it's not a project. A formal application will be subject to CEQA review. And the zone district varies. And we have Rebecca Atkinson, the planning department here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chair and board members. Good morning. The project description for this preliminary architectural review application is as you stated. There are 18 proposed small cell deployment node locations, which are considered one cluster of nodes, specifically in this application for the Midtown, south of Midtown, St. Clair Gardens and Palo Verde neighborhoods and vicinity. Verizon proposes a total of 92 small cell deployment nodes that will be identified and similarly clustered together in future applications. Today, Verizon prepared 3 proposed equipment configurations for preliminary public and ARB review and comment. This location map was included in your staff report and on the project plans, but generally this shows the distribution of proposed small cell nodes. They reflect the tolerances that each small cell node has in order to provide coverage and so forth. The applicant can provide more information on how frequent a node would be necessary in order to provide X amount of coverage. Here's an excerpt of the proposed, or comparison of the proposed 3 configurations. Generally, each configuration has the same antenna and attachments, a wood bayonet. Fiber in these locations would be provided through an aerial drop. The differences begin with the various equipment, cables, and mounting attachments proposed for each configuration. And of course, configuration 1 has a ground-mounted equipment cabinet. Key considerations. Formal applications will need to demonstrate compliance with FCC emission standards for health and safety. The proposed equipment configurations are for wood poles only at this time. You can see the design for street lights in a future application. Wireless carriers also appear to have different designs for their small cell deployment per informal communications that I've had. In the future, formal applications will be reviewed for consistency with the comprehensive plan. We included a summary of comprehensive plan goals and policies in attachment A of your staff report, and that starts on page 155 in your overall packet. Staff also included a copy of the wireless portion of the municipal code, and that is attachment B starting on page 158 in your overall packet, and that's another key item that the formal applications will need to conform to. Of course, architectural review findings, conditional use permit findings, and the aforementioned FCC standards. The purpose of the preliminary architectural review meeting today is to receive early feedback from members of the public and the ARB to discuss the key questions that Verizon has posed, beginning on page 1 of the project description, and to discuss the City Department preliminary location and criteria, the configuration design criteria, and the configuration design options that are outlined in the staff report. Next steps include the discussion today. Obviously, Verizon will submit formal applications, and there will be detailed staff analysis. I also included contact information for members of the public, for the Architectural Review Board members, and also my staff contact. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I included copies of public correspondence received since the production of the staff report. I also included the paint samples for the proposed ground-mounted equipment, and they're at places. And there was a mock cell site, non-live, installed near 1350 Newell. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go out, but I do have photos. And we also have quite a few staff members here from our utilities department, electrical, Jim Fleming, Gregory McKernan, and Jimmy Picara. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So now's the time for the applicant presentation. You have 10 minutes.
Chairman, members of the ARB, good morning. My name is Romel Angeles. I'm the manager of network implementation for Verizon Wireless in Northern California. And
I'm Matt Yurgovich, the applicant's permitting agent.
And we're here to present the Verizon Wireless small cell project in the city of Palo Alto, and also to seek recommendations from the ARB on our design concepts that will be utilized for this project. In this presentation, we will go through the project overview, such as the objectives, the siting criteria, and the design configurations of the project. And at the end, we have a list of questions for the ARB that we'd like to discuss with you that pertains to the design concepts. You've also received a detailed packet from us that has more detailed information about the project, such as photosims, individual site criteria, and also some sample paint colors for the equipment. So the main objective of this project is to improve the wireless capacity and coverage in the city of Palo Alto. In the past 5 years, we've seen a significant increase in wireless data usage. And we need to address not only the capacity concerns currently, but also to improve, to keep up with the current trends in increased usage for our customers. To accomplish this, we will be implementing these new wireless solutions called small cells. So small cells are low power sites that typically cover about 500 to 1,000 feet, and they can be mounted on the existing utility poles in the right-of-way. They work in conjunction with existing macro sites that surround the area, and since their footprint is very limited, they can only be placed in strategic and targeted locations. So think of the macro sites as the overlay coverage in the network. These small cells are underlay coverage that assist in improving the capacity and coverage. The current projects are comprised of 5 clusters, and this is the first cluster, and all of the design configurations in this cluster will apply to all the different 5 clusters. In June of 2016, Verizon Wireless and the City of Palo Alto executed the master lease agreement that gives Verizon Wireless the opportunity to attach these utility poles. So this next slide shows the coverage condition here in the neighborhood in Palo Alto, just south of Oregon Expressway. So these are the neighborhoods of Palo Verde, Midtown, and St. Clair Gardens. Color scheme, the red means poor coverage, yellow means marginal, and green means excellent. So the map on the left shows the current coverage condition here in this neighborhood. As you can see, there are a lot of reds in this neighborhood. Those little circles are actually the small cells that we're proposing. The map on the right shows our projected coverage after the system has been implemented. And you can see from this map, the reds have been replaced with the yellows and the greens. We're expecting a significant amount of improvement in the RF conditions in this neighborhood after the project is complete. So what makes up a small cell? This diagram here is an example small cell drawing. The must-haves for a small cell are the following. The antenna that transmits and receives the signal, they're typically placed on the top of the pole. The 3 radios that are mounted in the middle of the pole, these are the ones that process the signal that's being communicated. And then each small cell has power and fiber to power the equipment and also to communicate to our centralized hub location. An optional equipment that we're adding to our design is the backup battery, and this helps the sites to stay on during a case of a power outage. And then there are also some other ancillary equipments to connect the equipment together. And as Ms. Atkinson mentioned, there's a mock site that we completed right across the Palo Alto Arts Center, and hopefully you folks have had a chance to visit it, and we'd like to hear some feedback from you from that installation. So how do we select the pole locations? There are 3 key items that we have to meet in order to finalize the site locations. The first requirement is our Verizon engineering requirement. So as I mentioned earlier, they only cover a very small footprint, so they have to be located in specific locations. We don't have a whole lot of wiggle room in placing these locations from a target that the RF team has provided. The second requirement pertains to the California Public Utilities Commission and also the City of Palo Alto utility engineering requirements. We also call this the utility requirement that pertains to the constructability and the safety requirements of the pole. For example, there's a limited amount of vertical space on each pole where you can mount the equipment. Most of the pole candidates in an area actually fail this particular requirement due to the existing infrastructure already on the poles. And the third requirement pertains to planning and other siting concerns. We walked several sites with the city staff from the planning department, urban forestry, and also from utilities group, and they provided us some valuable information and feedback on the design. As an example, placing a pole in a corner of a street versus in the middle of the street. So what are the 3 different design configurations? So we have 3 right here in the screen. The first one shows what we call the vertical lineup of equipment. So each of these sites or configurations have an antenna on the top, and then you can see the radios in the middle here in a vertical lineup. We feel that this is the most seamless and most aesthetically pleasing configuration. In addition to that, we have the cabinet on the ground for the backup battery. The second configuration, instead of the backup battery on the ground, we have it mounted on the pole. Because of the limited amount of vertical space on the pole, we have to put the radios in a horizontal configuration. So this is what's called the horizontal lineup. And then configuration 3 is very similar to configuration 1, except that there's no battery backup. Most of our sites in this application are under configuration 3. In the past 6 months, we have conducted several community outreach initiatives to educate the residents and the community, to answer some of their questions, and also to seek design feedback from the community. We've established a website for the project, we've had a text campaign, and we've had 2 community meetings thus far. We've had significant positive feedback and support from the public. But we didn't receive any preference from the public as far as the configuration. We've been asking their preference on the configuration and the lineup, and we haven't really received any preference either way or the other from the public. Which leads us to the questions that we have for the ARB members. Pertaining to the design, we'd like to seek your feedback and recommendation on the following. From the design component, do you prefer the horizontal or vertical lineup of the radios? Do you prefer a ground-mounted cabinet or a pole-mounted cabinet for the battery backup? And also for the paint of the equipment, we provided 3 samples of brown. We feel that color brown would be a good for the equipment because it's the color of the pole, so it blends in better. On the ground cabinet design, we provided 2 samples of green for the ARB members as well. We provided street furniture options and also an art wrap option for the cabinet. So in summary, we provided the overview of the project, objective, deciding criteria, and design configurations. And we'd like to, again, receive your recommendation on the design concepts that we can implement on the design and finalize it and hopefully move forward with the project. In addition to that, I would like to also thank the staff for all of your support that you provided thus far for this project. That concludes our presentation, and I'd like to open that up for questions.
Are there any questions from the board? Robert?
Yeah, I have a basic question. Having seen, the drawings you have, and I went out to the mock-up that you have on Newell, which is a little bit deceiving because you've got nothing but trees in as a backdrop. So, they have a tendency to disappear in the trees. But having something like that put behind a beige-colored building makes it a lot different. I guess my basic question is, in the 21st century, based on what you can do, you've got to be able to come up with something that looks better than any of these. I mean, to me, these are just pug ugly no matter what. And that's basically it. I can't imagine that there isn't a design. I mean, if you look at these things, there's wiring hanging down from the bottom of it. It looks like an afterthought. I mean, that's my main problem with it. I got to figure that, and I've seen other ones that seemed like they were all much more thought out than these. This is, rather than, I'm guessing based on the way you have the 3 radios, that sort of thing, that this is a set design using those 3 radios, that sort of thing. And yet it looks like it's a piecemeal approach to doing this. I mean, it wasn't like, well, usually we have 2, but we had to squeeze in a 3rd radio on this particular design, so that's why it looks the way it does. And I got to figure that there's another way to do it. Right now, I'm just really disappointed from a visual standpoint. I mean, I'm an architect. I look at it. I know everybody wants their cell phone to work better, and so everybody goes, yeah, we love the project, but mainly because what it does for their cell phone, not what it looks like. It's our job to sit there and critique what it looks like. And right now, I'm not a happy camper.
Board Member Guyer, we respect your concerns. You mentioned several factors, and I think that those factors can be addressed on a site-by-site basis, starting with the color as it matches the background scenario. Depending on the surrounding foliage, depending on the exact location, we can paint the equipment to match perhaps the background if there's particular foliage around a utility pole. Perhaps we could look at some of the shades of green for the equipment to better conceal that equipment. With regard to the cable management, you mentioned the cable management is an issue. We have currently painted the cables to match the pole, painted brown. There are some other alternatives that we could do as well to conceal the cables. Our current proposal is consistent with Section 1842 110I, Criteria 1 of the development standards, which sets forth that we shall use the smallest footprint possible. However, in deviating from that standard, we could also deploy an equipment shroud. We like the idea of less is more, less equipment is more, and that seems consistent with the standards, but an equipment shroud would be possible. In the packet that I provided to you, the 3rd to last page, also on the presentation, let's see if I can, yeah. So this configuration here involves an equipment shroud, and I've worked on some limited select deployments where the equipment shroud has been utilized. The dimensions are approximately 1.5 feet wide by 1.5 feet deep by about 9 feet long to wholly shroud the cables you mentioned, the attachments. The difficulty, obviously, is that it's a much bigger appearance on the pole, whereas the proposing the individual boxes tends to fit within the silhouette of the pole and has less of an appearance. The individual boxes are also consistent with these being utility poles, but the equipment shroud is feasible. We've found oftentimes in deploying the equipment shroud that the public tends to prefer the individual units rather than the singular shroud, but it is a possible design alternative.
Okay, I do, if you, to the woman in the back, if you want to speak, we're going to do the public comment next. So I would like you to fill out a speaker card, which is right up here in the front, up here near the lectern. And I do have 2 speakers who will speak before you. And so we have Herc Kwan and Wolfgang Himmelbauer. And I think you'll each have 5 minutes. And so, yes, so we'll do it now. Mr. Kwan?
Hi, my name is Hark Kwan, and I actually sent an email to Rebecca several days, well, 2 days before, I guess. So I don't have a prepared speech, but then I actually, my house is actually right there on the second one, 2490 Lewis Road. I don't mind revealing my address, but the fact is that I'm very concerned about this project, and then because I have 2 young kids going to school here, and then our house is actually being remodeled right now, and then I actually found out this project. It sounds like it's in stealth mode. I did not find this out until I actually saw a notice right outside there's a pole outside my house, and then also I got this notice, and I told Rebecca that it's actually said that the public hearing today is actually on March 18th. Yeah, and I think this is actually not appropriate at all, because I don't know how many residents are here today to listen to this project. And then, I just lost my dad. He actually died of cancer last year in October at Stanford Hospital. And it's not due to that. It's just that I'm a son of someone who actually got cancer. And then I have heard about a lot of stuff about emissions from RF and all that. And then, I just noticed there's so many supporting letters here to set that out. I like this project. If that's the case, please move that antenna to someone who wrote these letters. Not in my backyard. I really don't. I don't know anything about the health effect and all that. If someone actually is well informed, and then know exactly what the effect is, maybe we can consider. But then look at the turnout today. There are not too many residents who came here to listen to this hearing. I suggested to Rebecca that we should move this hearing to another date so that more residents can attend. Thank you.
Thank you. This guy. And Wolfgang Himmelbauer.
Okay, good morning. My name is Wolfgang Himmelbauer. I'm a Palo Alto resident, and I had a kind of like a long-term question. So if you look at the history of these antennas, so it was AT&T a few years ago, right? Now it's Verizon. You can probably guess who is next. So every carrier who comes in here is setting up close to 100 antennas, right? So we're going to be cluttered with antennas all over. And going forward, there will be less and less antennas to choose from. So the concern I have is, so the ARB has set forth criteria how to select poles and which ones to exclude. So as more and more carriers come into the neighborhood and set up these antennas, will these criteria be weakened or perhaps even ineffective because there's simply not enough poles to choose from? That's my question. So does the city have a long-term strategy to address that? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we have a last speaker, and Rebecca, do you have the card? We have one last speaker. Great. Thank you, and this is Barbara. I can't read the last name.
I'm Barbara Kreiner, and the only reason I'm here is because I exercise in this building usually every day by walking up and down the stairs. I got the notice too that speaker was talking about, the first one, and I thought, why in the hell are they sending me something that was for a meeting in March, which I received last Saturday? And I presume that everyone else got their notices, with the same date. And I wouldn't have been here if I hadn't just walked through just at that very moment that I heard them say something, about this that made me sit down instead of, taking the stairs. And my other concern, they spoke about those earlier meetings to inform the neighborhood. I never got any kind of notification of any meeting, so I don't know who sent them or how people got to them. I do have to say that I don't use a computer, so you know, if you were notified by any of those methods rather than regular U.S. mail, then perhaps that's how they got the information, but I certainly didn't get any. This was my first notification. That said March.
Yes, great, thank you. Okay, and we have two more. Okay, so you have two more speakers up.
I'll make that stop.
There we go. Got it?
No wonder you don't trust me.
Well, it's old and crotchety timer. There we go. Okay, so we have Michael Murray or Michael Madvini and Carl Darling.
Good morning. My name is Michael Madvey. I actually live in Barron Park, not in this target area, but I think it's probably just a matter of time before the project, in fulfilling its 92 cell site locations, is going to enter our neighborhood. I have serious concerns about the aesthetics. The poles in our neighborhood in particular are loaded with wires, and it's growing. AT&T is rolling out their fiber network with copper on the poles extending from the fiber cabinets and so on. So we're already growing. I have a special concern, having read the package, that there's a co-location automatic approval that if some cell company puts in equipment at a location, that automatically approves presumably a competitor from coming in and adding to that location. The fact that that's automatic, if I'm interpreting that correctly, suggests to me that we've got limited control to this process. If we don't exercise the control now, we're locked into automatic features going forward. So speaking for myself as a homeowner, the pole across the street from me stands alone. There are no trees to mitigate the view. It's been a mess for decades. AT&T's telecommunications wires are rat's nests until recently. There's a power transformer on the pole. Palo Alto Utilities came by the other day and added some appenditures to the pole, part of a program. I'm not sure what that was, but they left a mess. There are coaxial cables dangling and so on. I am concerned about being backed into a corner where now, in addition to all that, there's going to be a cell site, and then on top of that, because of approval of that cell site, follow-on cell sites are going to have automatic approval. Again, it's mostly aesthetic. There's one thing I have not seen in any of the documentation, and that relates to the noise. I know when AT&T went through the neighborhood, there were complaints about the humming noise, and I saw a reference in the package to an interest in passive cooling, which suggests that the cooling fans were creating the noise. I've not seen where that's been addressed at all. I bring that up as a secondary concern to the visual aesthetic concern. Thank you very much for your time. Sorry about the mic.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
I think it's probably just, there you go.
Okay, and our last speaker is Carl Darling.
Thank you for listening to me. I'm a 20-year resident of Palo Alto. I live in St. Clair Gardens in Midtown, so I am in the jurisdiction of this project. As a project manager on many Bay Area jobs, I appreciate the hard work this group has to put into to study these proposals. I do really appreciate, and I appreciate being invited by Rebecca to this meeting, to the work that has to be done to improve the cell phone reception in this area. Many people do business out of their homes in Palo Alto, and the cell phone reception is a huge issue. So I realize that certain people will have aesthetic problems with some of these poles being added, and I do appreciate that. I also feel that something needs to be done sooner than later to improve the cell phone reception, which is terrible in Midtown. It's a major problem for people who do business, which is becoming more of an issue as time goes on. My wife does a lot of business out of her house. She works for Hewlett Packard. She's a director there. And so I'm kind of speaking for her in a way that I appreciate whatever is being done on this project, that if there is shrouds that need to improve the look of it, that it would happen, because it's a definite need for the people of our community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing today, and thank you for speaking, and thank you also for all the people who have sent emails to us. Staff, do you want to comment on the public notification?
So thank you. We do regret that there was a mix-up with the noticing. There was an incorrect date, as residents have mentioned on the notice. Staff did realize that and has sent out another round of notices. But more importantly, this is a preliminary review application. No decisions are being made at this time. And so the municipal code does not actually require notification. But we do try and do that notification, to bring these issues forward as soon as possible. We also have, on these 19 locations, there is the on-site notification. So we do hope that especially neighbors in the immediate area would have seen those on-site boards and would have been able to gain information from that.
And was there the newspaper notification
correct?
Did that have the correct date?
Correct. As always, our ARB meetings are posted in the weekly, and it does have this project description there.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to the board for comments. I just want to just mention before, that we only have purview over aesthetic issues here today. We don't have any purview over like potential health impacts. I think we don't have I think it's not our decision whether or not to do a emergency backup, but we can comment on the aesthetics of it. And I don't think we have any say over the technology that they're using, that they're proposing, say like a macro site versus these like distributed microsites. So, Robert.
Okay, well, I've already pretty much mentioned that I'm just not really a fan of any of these. And I guess they have to be taken on a one-to-one basis. The whole idea about do you put it on the pole or do you put it on the container? A lot of it depends on obviously the sidewalk and everything else that's there. Some of the questions, I think I'd rather just have a stealth painted box rather than, I mean, let's face it, I guess in our society, we've just gotten used to those things, so I just as soon sort of have them be out of sight, out of mind, rather than making them a colorful art statement, because that just brings them to the foreground. So, I mean, if I had to have a choice of those three, I think I'd pick the one, I guess it's the first one that has the actual unit on the ground as much as possible. I would also like to see, if you do have a shrouding situation, possibly on your mock-up, put, either a partial shroud so you can get the sense of here's what the shroud looks like, that sort of thing, because I'd like to see that. I have a hard time believing, and I'm not, arguing the point, but I have a hard time believing that other than guys like me or in my profession would even care about what's up there. And I have a hard time thinking that somebody would go, gosh, I really don't like that shroud on there. I'd like to eat it. But be that as it may, sometimes it's the busyness of 18 different items up there with wires up there draws your attention to it more than a single box that is totally enclosed or painted to match the pole. I'd rather have an option to see something like that. But other than that, it's just, I can't imagine still, based on all the technology that we have, we can't do something a little bit more sophisticated than what's there. Okay, that's it for me.
Any comments on colors?
Colors, I mean, you know, colors is basically, if the pole's brown, if you make it brown, that's probably the best solution to match the pole that's there.
Sure, and then they have the cabinet colors. They actually
Well, I mean, the
have chips.
cabinet is sort of the idea that if it's against a beige wall or near a beige wall, you paint it beige to make it disappear. I think that's what you meant when you used the term stealth. I guess you sort of match what's around it. You know, if you've got I don't know, a lime green building, you paint the thing lime green, even though you would never do that anywhere else, but it matches, it blends into the surroundings.
Wynn.
Thank you. I think this is an interesting issue for us to comment on because there is so much federal preemption, some of it appropriate, given the nature, sort of semi-public utility nature of this, and some of it perhaps unfortunate. Was the city required to enter into a master lease agreement, or was that just a city commercial decision since we own these poles?
I'd like to forward your question to Jim Fleming.
Sure.
Board members, my name is Jim Fleming. I'm with City Palo Alto Utilities. I'm a senior management analyst. The question is, was the city required?
Essentially, did we have to make our poles available for this kind of technology, or was this a choice that we made?
Yeah, the applicant has the right to build in the right-of-way, and they have a master license agreement for use of city-controlled space on those poles.
And they have a master license agreement because the city granted that license, or because state and federal law grant them that license, and all we do is the details?
Both. The council approved the master license agreement June 27 of last year.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, one other question, since you're here. Utility poles, as we've heard, are not necessarily presented as objects of beauty. That's not what they're designed for, or often what they achieve. But sometimes our straight lighting poles are intended to be design elements on a streetscape, and they do have rather clean design. Does this master license agreement also require that we permit this equipment on light poles that are purely light poles in undergrounded districts?
Yes, it does, because they're in the right-of-way.
That's unfortunate. Thank you. Or maybe very fortunate from the point of view of receiving cell phone service. It seems to me, with respect to the aesthetic questions that are asked by the applicant or by Verizon and its agents, that these are site-specific questions that can't be usefully answered on a blanket basis. The color that you should use, the design that you should use, depends on where you're putting it. Across from the Art Center, I did go look at your mock-up. You know, it's heavily wooded. At first glance, it looks like they're purple Martin houses, and it looks fine. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there. It's not particularly close to a residential property, so it would be good to see a mock-up in a more exposed and difficult location. I think in some cases, shrouding will feel much better and safer and more attractive to people. I think the same is true of colors as to where batteries go. Again, I think in my neighborhood, which is downtown north, we're losing a lot of landscaping to pedestals, to utility and communications pedestals, where the rose bushes go out and they go in. And so, of course, I'm in favor of underground vaults whenever we're permitted to require them, but as I recall, that's not very often. So my first preference is underground, and my second preference is site-specific, and certainly with as much accommodation to residents as possible. I mean, we walk by parks, we walk by businesses, but if we have a home, that's where we are all the time. And so that would be my first concern with the aesthetics and installation. I saw commentary about how the installation of these facilities might interfere with undergrounding, and I don't know if that's correct, Mr. Fleming? Future undergrounding? That it would make it more expensive or less possible?
There are a number of underground utility conversion projects that will occur over the next several years. So within the master license agreement, if a district is converted from aerial to underground, then the whatever is on that pole would have to go underground also.
At whose expense?
It would be at the applicant's expense.
Thank you. It does seem to me that we're not really going to successfully address the aesthetic issue of aerial clutter until we underground utility poles. So in the meantime, it seems to me the answers to these questions are site-specific at best. And I do agree that there was some discussion of noise, and that would be a major issue because it's easier to close the door or look elsewhere. It is not easy to abate noise. So that needs to be done by citing.
Okay, so great. Thank you for the for your submittal and doing the mock-up. I did look at the mock-up yesterday, and I did look at three of the sites, the ones that are highlighted in the staff report. I did look at all of those yesterday. So there was something interesting that we haven't seen before, which is like the art, there's the possibility of an art project. And I did do some research on that. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at the moment, but I did look at that in Campbell and San Jose. They've done like 100.
Yes, we provided some photos of art wraps is the term of art. They're vinyl wraps around the ground equipment. The photos we provided were from Walnut Creek, and that's an interesting option that the city might want to consider. However, keep in mind that with the ground cabinets, those provide battery backup. So for example, of the 18 facilities we're talking about here, only 3 involve ground cabinets, so very, very few ground cabinets are being proposed. Also, I want to mention that the radio units themselves emit 0 noise. This is state-of-the-art equipment. There's no acoustical implication from the radio equipment, only the battery backup units that, again, are very infrequently deployed, emit any noise at all, and those are well within the city's acoustical standards. But back to the art wrap, if I can answer any other questions about that.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about that. So the ones in San Jose, a few of them have been vandalized. And so how do you handle like graffiti?
The good news is with an art wrap is the goal with an art wrap is to prevent graffiti, and in fact they oftentimes do prevent graffiti. The graffiti artists are less inclined to impact other folks' art, so that's the good news. Otherwise, Verizon maintains a network operations center, a 24-hour NOC that promptly responds to graffiti removal requests.
So the situation that I understand down in San Jose was that these are like individual artists painting boxes, and the vandalism was actually not just, it wasn't really tagging per se, it was actually somebody repainting them gray. And then some of the artists didn't want, like the artists were donating their time. I think they got materials or whatnot, but if you're an artist and you're spending like 3 weeks painting this thing, you don't necessarily want to repaint it. So I was just wondering how you propose, how you've been thinking about that.
That's a good question. There, I would say several different ways to address that. The art wrap companies can deploy their own designs. It's a vinyl wrap, and those designs can be pre-approved, for example, or there could be a more collaborative effort with the art community to design specific items.
The ones that I'm aware of in San Jose and Campbell they're typically on like corners of like more major streets than I think what you're proposing here, which is really seems like more in people's front yards. I was wondering if you could speak to the Walnut Creek.
Yeah, well, with regard to the ground battery backup unit deployments, we've selected locations as tactfully as possible to avoid the heavy residential areas. So, for example, with the mock-up, you could see that the unit is not directly in front of a house. It's behind a bus stop bench. That's a good example. So avoiding those sensitive, highly visible locations altogether is our primary goal. Secondarily, the art itself could be tailored to the particular site, depending on what our goal is there.
Okay, thank you. And then on some of your alternates, I think there's one alternate for like a concrete bench. I was wondering, I've never seen that before. I was wondering if you could speak to if you've used it before and whether it works. I'm looking at it and the dimensions seem for the cabinet, and that's not for a person.
Yes, we did cite several concealment options, actually 2 different types of benches. There was a concrete bench and also a metal bench. You're absolutely right. Specifically the concrete bench looks a little big, difficult. I hope no one's sticking their baggage below the bench or putting their feet under there. That might be impossible to do. But there are some different design options. Also, the mailbox option was another one. One I might add that I believe is utilized just outside here, the window. So there are some other design options with regard to the battery backup ground units.
Well, I was curious as to whether the stealth garbage can option actually functions as a garbage can, or you could lead to
That's
a lot
what I was afraid of. People are going to throw garbage toward it and go, oh well,
That could be a problem, yes.
In the right place, the metal bench could work.
Okay, so so let me back up for a second. One is the criteria that the ARB set up and that you've been trying to follow wherever possible. That was sort of written at the same time that the AT&T DAS project went through. And at the time that we wrote it, we were assuming that it was like the dual antennas on each one and on each pole. And at the very last minute, AT&T agreed to do a single antenna per pole. And I think that that project has, I think, turned out pretty well. Like there were times after it was installed, I went to look at some of the poles, and I looked at them. I was looking at some of them and thinking, oh, they haven't installed it yet. I'm like too early. And then I looked again, and then I realized, oh, it was installed, and I didn't even really notice it. So I think there are ways of addressing the design to make it look better. It seems to me the criteria that we had didn't also anticipate mailboxes, benches, or an art project. And so I think that we could look at, I think that the board could consider reviewing the criteria for to allow for more options. So for example, like as I mentioned before, like the art project, it seems to me better for a more prominent location. If it's on a corner, close to a corner, on say like on Middlefield or something. I think that we should be open for discussion because I think the art piece could be an interesting project. I don't think it makes sense in this particular situation. But again, yeah, so the board never really considered any of these, like the benches or trash cans or the mailboxes. The art project, at least the ones that I've seen in San Jose, it seems to me that those were only public boxes, publicly owned cabinets, and not privately owned, so that's a little different. And then they also relied on donations and sponsors. So again, those are a little bit different than this particular situation. So we would have to address that if we do want to do that. I think some of your locations, the bench could be appropriate. Like you had one, let me see, let me get the address. It was like number 135, which is next to the creek. So for example, like, and that's on, that was on Ross Road. So but like, for example, just on Lewis Road, 1 block away, there is like actually a regular bench, presumably city-owned or whatnot.
Okay.
So like in that kind of situation, I think that a bench could work there.
And to clarify that proposal, 135.
Yeah, it doesn't.
But we are proposing a pole-mounted battery backup unit.
Sure.
Two of the 18 originally designed have pole-mounted battery backup unit. Would the ARB prefer to see a ground-mounted cabinet instead of the?
No, I don't want to get into too specifics of that. Yeah, because you have a lot of locations, and I think we're just trying to give you general comments. I'm saying that there are situations where a bench could work, and I would say like that's one of them. But you have other ones, say for example, 139, right on Colorado, where there just isn't space. It's somebody's front yard, and they've got a fence there, and they've got all new landscaping, and so obviously you wouldn't put it there. And you guys understand that, and you're trying to put everything on the pole in that situation.
With 139, we're not proposing any battery backup.
Yeah.
So
there's no,
again, respectfully to that situation.
And then, say for example, like on location 143, which is I forgot the name of the street.
El Verano, I believe.
Verano, yes, thank you. That's like the back corner. It's sort of like the back corner of somebody's near the back corner of somebody's property. It's mostly hedges and fences, and so like in that case, like it seems to me like just the most stealth option makes sense. Like there's no reason to call attention to it for like with a bench or an artwork, and so in that case I'd be fine with if there's a pad mounted box, I think it would be okay. With regard to the boxes, I actually like the mail boxes, but I think the mailboxes work downtown, where they're in an urban location and they're on the sidewalk. It seems like your regular cabinet kind of makes more sense out in the residential districts, because there are other telephone boxes that sort of look like that out there. I think you were showing 2 green colors, and I think we only have one maybe here. I think there was a dark green in the packet, possibly. So like this color, I think we have used something like this for the cable boxes that were installed a long time ago in the city. These, and I think this, I don't necessarily have an objection to this. These seem to, like over time, I'm saying like 30 years, they look pretty faded. And I would say that there are situations where darker color is better. Like if it's in a hedge, the darker color picks up the shadow of the leaves better than the lighter color. And I would say also that the darker color, like a darker color green, would be more similar to other things that we have in the right-of-way. So like we have backflow preventers, and sometimes the backflow preventers have a cage around that, and those are all typically dark green. So, so that's what I'm thinking of with regard to the greens. On the brown colors that you have on the poles, I think on the mock-up, I think it looks pretty good. I'm happy with the color with that. I think I agree with Robert that I think there are places where shrouds would be better. Maybe not everywhere, but like on site number like 139, which is on Colorado Avenue, it's near Colorado Avenue. Like it's close to a corner. I don't think there are any street trees there, or I don't remember anything. Nothing large. There are no large evergreen trees. It's right near somebody's front door. It seems to me like a shroud would be more appropriate there, even though it is bigger, right? But to me, it's cleaner. On the mock-up site, I wouldn't think a shroud would be necessary, right? And there were redwood trees all around there, and it makes the visual size of it smaller. And let's see if I have any other comments. I think that may be all the comments that I have. Robert, did you have something else that you wanted to add?
No, I'm, like I said, it is based on a one-by-one basis.
So I would just say on the maybe staff can correct me if I'm wrong. On the AT&T project, and this is before your time, but I think that the board got every, I could be wrong. I think we got every location for the first phase, but then I'm not sure that we actually reviewed all the future locations and other future phases of the project. So we reviewed it, and then, but the thing is, but when we actually had the hearing, we didn't comment on every location because we would have been here for days to do it. So, but it was useful and just for the ARB to sort of see if the project was headed in the right direction, give direction to staff if they thought there was a larger problem that needed to be addressed. So we could do it that way if you want. Yes.
So my experience with the city and new utilities is back, in the very late 90s, the city had on staff an architect a consulting architect actually, whose job was to go out with public works in the utilities department and increasingly with other communications companies and look at site-by-site location of all these facilities, looking at setting and landscaping and all these variables to try to minimize the adverse impacts. And I suspect we don't do that any longer, or do we still do that?
We do have a consulting architect on staff, but that person is mainly used in the review of our two-story houses through the IR process.
This was about what happened in the public right-of-way, and it was a deliberate response to concern about how we sited our utilities. And that kind of staff-level review is probably the most effective way to get to the fact that these facilities need to go in. There is a certain drive towards uniformity by the installers and maintainers, but site-specific adaptations can make things a lot better in a particular block or household. And I will say that with respect to these locations here, most of them would not, to me, be appropriate for art, though a few might. Also, what is the color coding on this cover sheet? I couldn't figure out what the colors, differently colored dots meant. I couldn't find a key.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's pink and blue and green and black.
What sheet?
Top.
Oh, let's just distinguish that they're different.
Yeah, that map shows the different configuration types for each of the poles. So configuration 1 is one color, 2 is the other color, and 3 is majority of the poles. So this signifies where we have ground-based cabinet, where pole-mounted cabinet, and there are no cabinets.
Where's the key that would explain to me which is which? Right in front of my nose, I'm sure, but...
Yeah, there was a...
There's a list of all the nearest adjacent private addresses and all the different all the different poll numbers and also the different node numbers. And in that list, it's attachment F in the applicant's project description. It has all the different configurations listed.
So it's not in the drawings, it's in the...
It would be helpful in the drawings to know what we're trying to look at.
We can make that more conspicuous on the title sheet.
So page 193 of the packet.
That's a lot of cross-reference.
Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
And it's good to know that noise will not, in fact, as far as we know, be a problem. That's a relief.
Okay, and I did want to address one of the public speakers about the co-location, and I understand that there is this came up on the Little League site before and I think AT&T as well, with regards to co-location. I think the speaker is correct. They do have, there are other carriers have rights to co-location that minimizes or reduces the approval process. So that is an issue. I don't know if we have any say over that.
As part of the formal application, the applicant will be required to show the full build-out scenario associated with each of these nodes. So I would suspect you have an opportunity to review the implications of citing a node at any one particular location. And it's not an automatic approval in later stages because any carrier would have to show compliance with FCC standards and so forth. And if there was a particular type of stealth requirement or something, that we would maintain existing screening and things like that. So that would be a Tier 1 wireless project, and then a Tier 2 would be a project that exceeded some other prior stealth or exceeded some other limit, but wasn't actually a new site, so that would be a Tier 2 project. So there are different review timeframes, shot clock deadlines, and different ways of reviewing the different type of forthcoming applications.
I forgot about the shot clock. When this comes, if and when this comes through for a formal application, could you mention the time schedule in the staff report? Because it's different than our regular A or B timetable. So I think, and the public isn't always aware of that. So if you could do that for the next report, that would be good. And I have a question for staff. Are there other similar projects coming from other carriers?
Yes, actually, we have at least 3 other applicants that are in discussions with staff about submitting either formal applications or preliminary architectural review applications. Staff has strongly encouraged all applicants to submit preliminary architectural review applications.
Thank you for that. So I think that's all of the comments. Do we have any follow-up? Or if you want, do you have any, yes, Wynn?
So some of these are probably relatively non-controversial, and they can be done fairly easily. I think the Newell is an example of something where you could do almost any of these things and everybody'd be fine with it, the few people who noticed it. And there are others, clearly, which are not in that way. They're either very distressing to people who are living near the proposed project, or they're otherwise visually difficult. So if it's possible for staff and the applicant to sort those out so we put our energy and thought into the difficult problems, that would be helpful. I don't know how you do that, but that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Paul Albritton, I'm outside counsel for Verizon Wireless, and perhaps you remember me from the AT&T project a couple of years ago, and Meadow Middlefield Palo Alto Little League project that we also worked on. And I just wanted to say on your specific question about what's now called the Spectrum Act and the administrative approval of additional facilities on an existing facility, that you have an additional layer of control here because it's a master license agreement. So there has to be a site license agreement from Palo Alto to go onto each pole, and so there's an ability to direct carriers to other poles as opposed to co-locating on the similar pole. Of course, it would depend on the kind of design. I just wanted to quickly add that we did learn a lot from you, the ARB, several years ago, and those aesthetic criteria were all taken into account in locating these poles, not locating on corners where they could be seen from two directions, not placing in front of people's windows, but between property lines and driveways to avoid views, locating whenever possible adjacent to trees like the mock location. Wherever we can do that, we're putting the radios within the trees, the antenna sticking up above. So all of those aesthetic criteria that you asked us to look into before is being done in this project as well. And then lastly, I just want to say, as a telephone corporation, Verizon Wireless has the right to use the right-of-way. We can even put our own poles in the right-of-way, but we're doing everything we can to use existing infrastructure. But these really are telephone boxes on a telephone pole, and because of the Public Utility Commission, General Order 95 requirements for linemen to be able to climb the poles and all sorts of things, we have a lot of constraints about any kind of camouflaging or because the poles are supposed to be used by multiple utility companies for utility purposes. So we do what we can to minimize the equipment, streamline the boxes so that they're with verticality and so forth, and we have some shrouding options. But there are these federal and state laws that affect how we use these telephone poles, and we're working as closely as we can with the city to do that. And every pole is walked with the utility department, the planning department, and our people. We're following a similar process to AT&T, where we're bringing forward 4 clusters, which is what we did with AT&T. You will see each of the poles in each of the clusters before it comes to you. I know that some of the members walk those poles before each of those meetings. And then if you have individual poles that you want to call out during that meeting, then you can do that. And as you know, the public also will have the ability to come and express their concerns about a specific pole, which may also allow us to modify designs for that specific pole. So Verizon Wireless is very conscious of the aesthetic concerns and working with the community, and we'll continue to do that throughout the process. And we really appreciate the comments today.
Great, thank you. So this is a preliminary, so there's no action is being taken today. We will see you again in the future once you've submitted an application. Any last comments? No?
I have no last comments, but a general comment.
Okay. So, okay, so I think that's it on this one, and I think we still have minutes to review. So thank you. Okay, so we have the last item on the agenda is to review the draft architectural review minutes from May 4th, 2017. And those they're not in the packet, they came by email. I had a couple comments. Wynn, do you have anything?
I have some minor corrections for staff. Again, my favorite was that we don't have implacable ordinances, we have applicable ordinances. Generally, I thought it was a good job.
Robert? No. Okay, so I just had a couple comments. So on page 12, this is on the bridge, on the bicycle bridge. There's a woman mentioned as Claudia, and that was Claudia Guadan from FMG Architects, from the that's Guadagne, from the architects, project architect's office. And then also on page 20 and 21, the minutes cited a male speaker, and I think that was Roy Schnabel from Biggs Cardoza from the Bridge A&E firm. So,
move approval as amended.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. So that's a 3-0 with 2 members absent. Great. And When, I think you had one last comment.
Oh, I had one general comment. Came from the comment by either staff, or I guess the applicant, that we were going to be seeing more underground garages and perhaps more mixed-use projects. And I suspect that's true. And I hope that when we look at these in the future, we think about security and sense of security from the beginning, because this was a very constrained site and probably very difficult to address. But in my view, an expensive operating system is much less desirable than a design that works on its own.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I like the recent multi-story grocery stores. Mm-hmm. I mean, they do like all glass stair enclosures, glass elevators. Seems to me to make it is the transparency makes it seem much more much safer. And I think Board Member Balte in the past has argued for natural light, say like the Kepler's bookstore in Menlo Park, does make it, the light wells do make a difference. So there are ways that the design can be addressed.
I think it's a design problem worth addressing early, and very early, because once you get very far, it's too late.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.